The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
Jesus said to his disciples, "You have learned how it was said, 'You must not commit adultery.' But I say this to you, if a man looks at a woman lustfully, he has already committed adultery in his heart with her. And if your right eye should cause you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it will do you less harm to lose one part of you than to have your whole body thrown into hell. And if your right hand should cause you to sin, cut it off, throw it away. For it will do less harm to lose one part of you than to have your whole body go to hell. It has also been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a writ of dismissal. But I say this to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except for the case of fornication, makes her an adulteress. And anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord.
In our first reading from Elijah, we have this incredible text because Elijah is out in the mountain of Horeb. Horeb is in Egypt, or is in the Sinai, it's in the desert. It's far out from the land of Israel. And the first thing that God asks him is, what are you doing there? What are you doing there? So Elijah is there in the mountain, and there comes a mighty wind and a strong tearing down the mountains and the rocks. God is not there. There comes a fire. God is not there. There comes an earthquake, and God is not there. Now, Baal, who Elijah was doing battle with, the false gods, is a god of thunder and lightning and weather and extreme circumstances. And so the text is saying something that the first century Jew would have understood very clearly. That God was not Baal. The Baal, who was the god of all of these fantastic things, God was not there in that. And then there comes a gentle breeze. And in this gentle breeze, that's where he finds God. This is a really beautiful text. It's a beautiful text because this is the text where we start to understand how we really listen to hear God. People want to hear God in the big events of life, but they don't listen to God in the silence of your heart. And it is in the silence of our heart that God speaks most loudly and most profoundly. But we want the thunderstorm, we want the fire, we want the earthquake, we want the thing to rock and roll. Then we might hear something. But God is in the silence, in the gentle breeze. Second thing that the text has that is so important, the reason why Elijah is out at Horeb is because he's running from God. Like Jonah, running from God. And not just running from God, running from the mission that God has given to him as a prophet of Israel, because he found that mission too hard. You ever found that whatever God asks you a little too tough? You ever found that? Huh? That it was a little inconvenient, a little too difficult, and rather than doing what God asks, you run and do something different? Well, God found Elijah right where he was. See, what is you doing here? How you reach here? You're supposed to be in Israel where you are a prophet that I send you to be. What are you doing here? That's the second teaching from the text. That the tough things that God asks us to do, God will give us the courage to do it if we would yield ourselves to God. It's never easy. It's always tough. It's always incredibly demanding. It stretches us in ways that we don't like. But you know what? If God asks us to do it, he will give us the courage to do it. This gentle breeze in which God speaks, I like to think of it as conscience. Because, all of us have conscience. And the ancient tradition says that the voice of conscience is the voice of God. And when we listen to our conscience, which is the gentle breeze, that inviolate part of ourselves that will always speak the truth if we would dare to listen to it. If we would dare to listen to conscience, then so much would go better in this world. Because if we listen to conscience, we couldn't treat another person as if they are less than us, as if somehow they're inferior. We could not do that, because the voice of conscience would speak at our very core and tell us that they are a son or daughter of God just like you. If we listen to the voice of conscience, how could racism ever exist? How could sexism ever exist? How could we ever not love the person who is in deep need and do whatever we can to help them if we listen to conscience? That gentle breeze. But the text is also a text that speaks about prayer. Because sometimes, in our prayer, we want to go into places where we are talking to God in loud noises and so on. That's fine. This is a form of prayer. But Elijah is speaking about another form of prayer, the prayer of the heart, where we actually listen in the silence of our heart to the God who is always present to us, where we learn how to go silent so that God can actually speak to us and speak to our heart. The tradition of Christian meditation is such a tradition, where we sit with our back erect, we sit with our feet on the ground, our hands down on our knees or up. We sit and become conscious of our breath. And in being conscious of our breath, we say the sacred word, Maranatha, which we find in Revelation 21. Come, Lord. Come, Lord. And sitting, waiting, praying, breathing, and saying the sacred word, what we are doing is what Elijah is saying. We're listening to God in the gentle breeze and allowing our conscience to speak loudly, because we're stilling the whole house so the conscience can speak. This is a contemplative life, and this is a contemplative way that all of us are invited to. This is not for some, this is for all of us. Go to WCCM, World Community for Christian Meditation. Go to their website, you'll see. Download the app. Try it today. Start with a few minutes, 7 or 10 minutes. Work yourself up to 20 minutes a day. God speaks in the gentle voice, in the quiet voice. I want to make a comment on the gospel reading, because it's such an important reading for us. Here we see Jesus talking about the dignity of a human being, and saying that you must never use another person as the object for yourself. So no lust. So it's not just don't commit adultery. He takes it higher and says don't even lust over somebody else. Now, that's real higher. That's real high. Because that means that it's not even what you do in action that he's talking about, is what also we do in our thoughts. Why? Because the way we think about people is the way we act towards people. And that is really where he's getting at. And he goes right down, and here we see, he says, and he also said, anyone who divorces his wife must give her a writ of dismissal. But I say this to you, everyone who divorces his wife, except for the case of fornication, makes her an adulteress, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Jesus takes the law and carries it right up. Why? Because from the beginning, and you'll see this later in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew 19, from the beginning, God made them male and female, so that a man should leave his mother and father's house and be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. And so he's tying lust with adultery, with divorce, and he's saying all three are steps to each other. But he's also saying that this divorcing, that's not permittable. Why? Because God made them one. And what God has made one can't make two. Now again, this is a hard teaching for many people, and I understand that. But in this hard teaching, we have to hear the teaching not just from the external noise. We have to hear this teaching from the internal silence of our heart. So are there no conditions under which people must separate? I'm not saying that. Domestic violence is not for the good of the spouses. And no one should stay in a marriage where there's domestic violence. No one. That's just because, again, that is the taking somebody as an object and creating harm for people. But the divorce thing, that's something that we have to really work hard with. And that's why sometimes when marriages have reached to that stage, you need spiritual guidance and spiritual counseling so that you discern what is the will of God. It's so easy to say, I done with this. And people do that 3 months into marriage, these days. I done with this. As if it's a contract. And that's the easy way out. And it's also easy to put up with what is actually violence and harm and allow yourself to be battered because of the teaching of the church of no violence. And I'm saying none of those are the will of God. Neither of those. The will of God is somewhere in between. But to get to that will of God, you have to get to the gentle voice. You have to get to the stillness inside. You have to get to that place of discernment where you can actually listen to the voice that God is speaking in the silence of your heart. And it is only that voice can actually lead us to life, to truth, and to the will of God that is always going to be for us the perfect solution to our life and to the dilemma that our life is in. Not running from the mission, not running headlong into a fire, but giving ourselves to the life, to the mission, to the call, to the vocation that He has given to us. Amen.